The Twitch scene is absolutely imploding now because of what Emiru streamed recently.
Emiru bomb? Uh-oh.
Okay. I just feel like the streaming space just sucks. It's embarrassing.
The Mizkif situation got worse.
I'm going to stand up for myself. I am going to defend myself in these situations.
I feel like it's gonna change things forever.
Okay, so recently Emiru came forward in a very serious stream and spoke about her former partner Mizkif, and more specifically about
The psychological and domestic abuse, stalking and harassment, sexual assault, and threats of blackmail that Mizkif has done towards me.
And a few days later, Mizkif decided to address these allegations of domestic abuse and sexual assault by starting his stream with, of course,
It's time to go full demon time. It's clearly obvious at this point. It's full demon time.
Now before anything, let's zoom out a bit and look at the bigger picture. When both sides of a relationship are streamers, that relationship stops being private. It becomes part of the brand. Their faces, their friendships, their living situation, all of that has been content for years. So when something goes wrong, it's not just we broke up. It's we broke up in front of millions of people who's gonna have their opinions about it. And that changes how people behave. Because suddenly, you don't just lose a partner, you risk losing a part of your audience. They want to defend themselves, but every word they say becomes content. And they also want privacy, but they built a career on being seen publicly. So now that we have set the perspective, let's take a look at the psychological dynamics behind this situation. One of the things Mizkif mentioned in his stream was that he and Emiru were trauma bonded.
We were told that the person who just hit my car was now inside holding a gun. The cops came, the drunk driver did have a gun, and was sentenced to 3 to 5 years in prison. And on the way home, I grabbed her hand, and she grabbed mine. And we knew we were trauma bonded, and we didn't want to let go.
But he actually uses it somewhat incorrectly, which is okay, it's a common mistake. But a trauma bond doesn't just mean that we went through a trauma together and got closer. A trauma bond happens when a person forms a deep emotional attachment to someone who also hurts or controls them. After moments of fear or abuse, the brain clings to any sign of kindness or affection as proof that the relationship is still safe. And over time, the person starts to associate that emotional intensity with love. It's not as simple as, why don't you just leave? Because the relationship becomes wired around survival. Now the thing is that Mizkif used the term incorrectly, but you can actually see hints of this trauma bond pattern in the relationship. You can see a mix of attachment, anger, and fear that kept these two connected, even when it wasn't healthy. And that brings us to another layer of this whole dynamic: control. When someone feels like they're losing control in a relationship, whether it's emotionally, socially, or in terms of status, they'll try to regain it in other ways. And the more insecure they are, the harder they try. And that's when you start seeing things like constant check-ins, trying to keep tabs on what the other person is doing, or even threatening them. So when we see these behaviors, this is not about anger or revenge. This is about a fear of losing power. And that fear becomes much more intense in a public relationship like this, where your status and image are tied to the other person. And that fear of losing control often leads to deflection.
But Emmy was also violent. She would throw clothes or plushies at me, and I punched holes in the walls or slammed doors in aggression.
Now listen, I don't mean to invalidate people who suffered from a plushie accident or lost a close one in a close one. But you can all see that comparing punching holes in the walls with throwing a hoodie is such a silly comparison. When someone slams doors or punches walls, it creates a very tense and fearful environment for people around them, especially if it's meant to send a message. When someone throws a plushie... So what is this? This is a case of whataboutism. It's basically when, instead of actually responding to a critique or problem about X, someone just deflects by bringing up Y. Like, well, What about them? That's the main defense Mizkif leans on when addressing the allegations. But it actually doesn't resolve anything. It's just taking the bare minimum of responsibility, just enough to sound fair, and then moving the spotlight. And you can see a similar pattern of deflection in this clip from his sister.
I said, I think that he is a shitty boyfriend, not a shitty person, okay? It takes two to be in a toxic relationship.
It's a more subtle kind of deflection, but it's built on the same logic. And by the way, what she says is not necessarily true. It takes two people to build a healthy relationship, but it only takes one person to destroy it or make it toxic. A healthy dynamic depends on mutual trust, empathy, and accountability, all things that require effort from both sides. But toxicity can't come from one person crossing boundaries, manipulating, or controlling the other, no matter how kind or patient the second person is. Saying it takes two might sound balanced or fair for some people, but in cases involving abuse, it can actually be one of the most harmful things to say, because it implies that the victim is partly responsible for what happened, that they somehow contributed to the harm. The only thing that this statement achieves is that it shifts focus away from the abuser's actions and places a sole blame on the person who was hurt. And that brings us to what I think is the most important part of this entire story. Not the drama, not the blame, but the choice to finally speak. I've seen people asking, why did they wait so long to say something? Why is it happening at this moment? But the thing is that speaking out, especially about abuse or assault, isn't really about timing. It's about safety. People who've gone through this sort of thing speak out when they feel safe enough to do so, or when a new threat triggers that need to speak out. And in Emiru's case, she noted that a new danger is emerging before she went public, and that she doesn't want people to go through the same thing that she did.
I was informed by 3 separate people, one of whom was present for said incident, that he had done something similar to something that he had done to me, to someone in LA at the end of September. And this person is not a streamer or content creator, but obviously that does not matter. And because of this, I cannot in good conscience sit here knowing that I know critical information about someone that almost no one else does and not say anything.
But even if that wasn't the case, waiting to speak out doesn't necessarily mean someone's lying or making things up. It means they were trying to survive in the safest way they could. It means they were weighing the risk of speaking against the risk of staying silent. And sometimes silence feels like the only form of protection you have, especially when the person you'd be speaking against isn't just a partner, but a public figure, someone with an audience, influence, and a platform that can talk back and cause even more problems for you and the others around you. So when someone finally speaks out, it has more meaning behind it than just revealing some past experience. And maybe that's the real takeaway here, that behind every headline or drama stream, there's a very human struggle between fear and self-protection, between silence and the need to be heard. So instead of choosing sides, I think it's more meaningful to think about what these situations say about ourselves. Goodbye.